Hi, everybody. John Haldy here, and I am really delighted today to have the chance to talk to Alan Schwarz. Alan, welcome.
Delighted to be here, John.
Alan and I go back, good God, almost 30 years, right, Alan?
Yeah, almost. No, it is exactly. I think it was summer of '95.
And Alan, I'm going to give a few of your bona fides, but we'll get more into it as we go. But Alan's got actually a math background originally from a prestigious university, but he fell into doing sports writing and had an amazing career, and we'll touch on that. But you worked for Baseball America, you worked for ESPN, you worked for Sports Illustrated, you worked for New York Times. Am I forgetting any other notables there?
Oh, that's pretty good.
And I'm pretty sure, if I recall, you were under consideration for a Pulitzer at one point,
I was the runner-up for the Pulitzer Prize in Public Service in 2011. Yeah,
which I'm pretty sure is the year that the Pulitzer lost all claim to reliable anything, and we stopped hearing about
that is what I've been told. Yes, that was the jumping the shark moment, and so yeah.
it. So, Alan, the reason I asked you to come on today, and I can't believe that I've been in and around this FedEx world for 10 years now, and I've known you for 30 years, and it was just last week when the light bulb went off, and I said, holy crap, I need to get Alan to come on and talk to us because the parallels between what's going on in transportation in my mind and what you've been reporting on for the last 15 years and writing books about, I think that there's neat parallels. And I'd love to pick your brain for a little while and learn about what you've done and see if you can shed some insight from your side of the world that might be relevant to our transportation line haul side of the world. Is that cool with you?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think it's fascinating that you even think there are parallels. I'm looking forward to hearing what you think they are, and then we'll travel down that road, if I may, together.
Okay, well, the first place I want to start, which is where, and they're all going to be relevant, but I'm going to pick this one at random. You're the guy who broke the story about the NFL concussion problem, right? You were working for the New
Yes.
York Times when that really bubbled to the surface. Is that accurate?
Actually, no. I was a I covered baseball exclusively. This is in well, from '91 to '96 to 2006, which is when I got to know you, of course. I was exclusively a baseball writer. First for Baseball America, and then ESPN. I was the host of Baseball Today on ESPN.com throughout the 2006 season. And I did not work for the New York Times. I did a lot of freelancing for them. I did a sports statistics column, but a friend of mine knew somebody who wanted to talk to a sports journalist about what he knew about the NFL and about their concussion problem. And he wanted to talk with somebody like me about what to do. And I said, I'll bring you to the New York Times. I'm friends with the editors. And to my surprise, the Times editors said, Alan, you run with it. And they hired me virtually overnight to do the stories, the first couple of stories that, I mean, now it's so long ago that people may not remember, but a couple of suicides that had taken place in the NFL where the players had been discovered to have chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, which has almost become a part of the football language at this point. And, I reported on those, but when the NFL would say over and over, well, they're just isolated cases, there's no issue with concussions, et cetera, my math background was such that I knew full well there was a problem. I understood the probabilities involved and the math behind the data. And, it took us 4 years, but we finally got the NFL to admit that 2 plus 2 does in fact equal 4. It doesn't equal 5, Roger. And and that's when everybody found out about all these dangers. And so it was really a 4-year haul, and it was the biggest project I've ever worked on, ever hoped to work on.
So the reason I think there might be some parallels is in our trucking space, you have a carrier, which is the company that has independent contractors in line haul who work for them that provide trucks and drivers for them. And the owners of the independent contractors are responsible for hiring those drivers and buying the trucks and providing them at the appointed place to do certain things. And then, of course, you have the drivers. And loosely, you could think of the carrier as the league. And you could think of the owner of a trucking company with 20 trucks and 25 drivers as the team owner, if you will, and their managers are the coaches or the managers, and the drivers as the players. And there are undercurrents, incentives, if you will, for people to push the envelope, to drive a little longer past being tired, to run equipment that isn't quite the way it should be, but it's good enough. Tires aren't inflated the way they should. Drivers maybe aren't doing their pre-trip inspection. Maybe they're not red flagging a truck because if they red flag it, they don't get paid that day and the truck doesn't operate and the owner doesn't get paid. There's all kinds of different incentives that run counter to being super cautionary. And I
Yeah.
have a feeling that there were incentives like that in NFL between the league and the owners and the players.
Yeah, I mean I'm going to interrupt you because that's absolutely fascinating. And yes, you have absolutely hit on something because it's more than football, okay? And frankly, it's more than truckers. It employers and employees, there are in very different sort of constellations of incentives, okay? And the owner, the truck the owner of the entire operation, in this case the NFL, say, uh, wants to make money, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with making money. We all want to make money, okay? And they need to think of efficiencies and how to keep costs down and labor costs down and whatnot, and just do the things that businesses do. The workers, all the way down at the bottom, well, they want to make money as well. They want to make money for their families, et cetera, but they also want to stay safe. Thank you very much. And so their incentive might be to not drive that truck because I'm concerned about some of its safety, things, its safety profile. And the company might say, well, you know what? We think it's fine. Get out there. And so there's this inherent sort of pressure, coercion of the employer to make the employee do something that he or she would rather not. That is not something that is in the company's best interests, but is not in the employee's best interests. You have that all over the place in a lot of different situations. And so when you talk about a trucker having to do a 20-hour drive in a truck that he's really not so keen on, because his employer is pretty much coercing him to do so. Not a whole lot different than an NFL player being told, "Hey, I don't care if, you're a little dizzy or you're nauseous from getting your head hit, get out there and, do your job." And so it's that coercion that and the pressures to do what you're told by your employer when it really isn't good for you personally or your family. And I think we all face pressures like that, where you want to make your boss happy, even though it's not great for you, but there are limits. And the company wants to make the employees happy, but there are limits. And when you talk about Venn diagrams and what crossovers there may be, uh, a lot of times there isn't crossover, and it's typically the employee who gets who gets the shaft.
Well, drivers are drivers. The owners of these contractors have their set of incentives. The carrier has their set. There's something that we talk about in the trucking world, whereas safe, compliant, meaning you've checked all the boxes that are required to say you're safe. So you have electronic logging devices that say the driver can only go so many hours before they have to take a break, and they can only work so many hours in a time frame. And you've got so-called pre and post-trip stuff, and very black and white. The things you have to do takes time, takes money. But being compliant doesn't necessarily mean safe, because if a driver has something going on at home and was up all night before they come to work, and now they're driving an 80,000-pound rocket down the highway, even though they're within the strictures of the guidelines, they might know they're not safe, but they're compliant. Were there similar kinds of tensions when the NFL started addressing this stuff, where they said, okay, well, you've checked the box, but people knew it wasn't really safe?
Well, I think we see that to this day, even when there has been a lot of the reform in the NFL. Before the work that I and the New York Times did, there were no boxes to be checked. It was just the Wild West.
Okay.
And, teams just did whatever they felt like doing. How many fingers do I have? Do I have up? Or here's some smelling
And if
salts,
you
and
get the
they could.
fingers within five, it's good enough.
Yeah, exactly. And and so there were no boxes to be checked. Now there are. Everyone's heard the phrase concussion protocol. I mean, we hear it a million times a day, and that phrase did not exist before, frankly, I showed up. And so now there are boxes to be checked, and you do see teams, and I think they care. I'm not that cynical when it comes to football. I'm really not. I mean, there's a lot of things to not like, and a lot of things to be cynical about. But in general, okay, um, you have doctors try to assess whether the player is quote unquote safe. And by the way, safety doesn't exist. Okay, risk exists, and safety is the absence of risk, or the amelioration of risk. Safety is, I don't even know what that word means, frankly. But uh, so you have people checking off the boxes, but then the player can still say, "Look, I don't know. Your boxes may say such and such, but I know I'm not right." The player has the option to do that, and that will be respected today in a way it never would have 20 years ago. And so I think that these procedures, if anyone has half a brain, they know that the procedures and the boxes are just the start. It's just a standardization of what must minimally be done to create, and again, I'm putting it in quotes, greater safety in operation. But these boxes can't anticipate everything. But, you know, how many employees out there are going to be able to call up their employer, who damn well needs this person to work today, thank you very much, and they're going to say, I had a fight with my wife last night, I'm not really all there today. You suck it up and you do it. And if you need to take a ton of Red Bull, or frankly, and I'm not endorsing this, but who are we kidding? People listening to this, or watching this, they've heard of Adderall. They know what amphetamine is. You know what? They're going to do stuff that is not in their best interests, just like football players.
And by the way, we're going to come to that Adderall thing. So put a pin in that, because we're absolutely coming to that next. That was number.
Okay.
Um, as you've seen it evolve in with the NFL's evolved, because you say 20 years ago there was nothing. Now there's a concussion protocol, and there's awareness of it, and there's people talking about it. It's not a dirty secret kind of thing.
Mm.
What were the dynamics from your perspective in how it evolved? Was it forced upon everyone from the outside, or was the league taking a lead? Was the owners taking a lead? Were the employees taking the lead? How did that come to pass?
Look, I hate saying this publicly, but it just, history has shown and will show that it was me. It just was. They answered to me, because they were running around doing, oh, well, we gave him this test, such and such a test, and oh, this guy got evaluated. Well, I literally took out my stopwatch and said, he was evaluated for 3 minutes and 14 seconds. And I would call up experts and say, can you do a proper concussion evaluation in 3 minutes and 14 seconds? No, you cannot. Thank you very much. Call the league. Say, hey, you know, how in the world can you do? Oh, well, we think we provide the best safety in the world. Well, guess what? I'm going to quote 10 experts saying you're full of crap. And so the NFL and its doctors and whatnot were really dragged kicking and screaming into, out of the morass of sort of football mentality of, just give me a cortisone shot. I'll go, I don't care if my thumb is hanging like a sausage link. Just give me a cortisone shot and I'll go back in the game. So no, the league didn't take a lead on anything. And I'm not putting them down for that. I'm saying it's a fact. The doctors didn't take the lead on anything, although a lot of them did a lot of good and were sources of mine. The players didn't take the lead. The New York Times took the lead and so unequivocally proved, both logically and mathematically, that what the NFL was saying about the dangers of concussions was so flabbergastingly wrong that everyone figured it out at the same. Everyone's like, "Oh my God, there's no denying it now." And then, did the league have to change things? Sure. Did doctors have to change things? Sure. Did the CDC have to change things? Did laws in different states have to change their laws or adapt their laws to make it where it's illegal to put a kid back into a game after, with any suspicion of a concussion? It really was in response to the New York Times proving beyond anybody's doubt that, there's a problem. We need to fix it. And that's not ego on my part. It's just what happened.
In my world, it's an interesting dynamic because with a carrier that has independent contractors, the red line that the carrier can't cross is telling them how to do something. You live in New York City. You can get into a taxi and you can say, take me to 94th and 3rd, right? You can't tell him how fast to drive or how hard to brake. That's illegal. You can tell him, I want you to go up Park Avenue and turn right on 92nd. So there are lines that a carrier can't cross. Carriers want this to be a safe business because of insurance and costs and everything else. Owners want it to be a safe business for that reason too. And I think drivers want it to be a safe business. But the oddity that I see is there are all of these contractors. So think team owners who are trying to figure out how to run a safe program. Imagine running a safe football team. And they're all trying to figure it out on their own. They sometimes come together and swap notes, but generally speaking, there's no coordinating body. What advice would you give to our world on how to attack it? Because we don't have an Alan Schwarz in a New York Times shedding the spotlight on it with a megaphone. But I think there are good intentions, but there's a lot of ignorance.
Well, I mean, and speaking of ignorance, I'm going to come at it with my share of it. I mean, are there unions here? I mean, are the
No,
truckers
that's the whole thing
unionized?
about independent contractors. It's not unionized.
Right.
That's
Oh
that's
boy.
that's the you don't use the U word, please. No. It's a family
Sorry. Bleep
show.
bleep that out. Bleep that out.
You can use the S word, but not the U word.
Can I say F you?
Sure.
Okay, there you
Just as
go.
long as the last one isn't the U.
Watch it.
I
You got
know
one syllable out, not both. All right. Um, wow, you really got me with that one. Um,
because there's a
it'll
desire.
come. I'll tell you, it's going to come down to the employee, the independent employee, and the relatively independent employer. Individual employee and individual employer, I think, is a better way of putting it, to hopefully respect each other. Now, that might be naive. I like to hope it isn't. Um, but if there are no established procedures that either side must follow,
Well, there are, but they're the
oh,
compliant ones. And every safety expert in our field will tell you compliant safety compliance is not the same as safe. Now, as you
There's no
said,
such thing as safe,
safe.
John. There's no such thing as safe. No, I'm serious. I'm going to challenge you now, bub. Okay. What does the word safe mean?
Correct. The truck never moves, right?
Well, yeah,
So, so what's the right term? Is it risk management?
there you go. There you
Okay.
go. Risk management, because it ain't never going to be zero.
Right.
And you have to accept that. You know, we all accept that the job of a trucker, and I know it's more sophisticated than that, but just trucker, just for us to just use that word, um, is inherently risky. Okay, so is a cab driver, so is all sorts of folks. So is a football player. Every and so you need to decide what is the range of risk that we are comfortable with. And because there's, give and take, there's a point of diminishing marginal returns. I
Right.
mean, how safe do you really need it to be? You're not going to say, well, you know, the fastest you can drive is 45. I mean, that's stupid. Okay. You're going to have a maximum, perhaps, speed of 75 or whatever the hell it is. But you're
65
not going to,
cases. Yep.
is it? Is it? Okay. I just don't know if in the middle of Wyoming, it's literally the Wild West and you can just do whatever you want. However,
It's a very
um,
hard thing to set these rules because there are different scenarios where 65 is an absurdly fast speed and other
right.
places where it's unsafe when everybody else is doing 80.
Exactly. Exactly. But that's the thing is these guidelines are just the start. I understand that they can become draconian. And let's face it, it's all done because of insurance. All right. This is all about insurance. That doesn't mean it's inherently bad, but it does mean what is the insurance industry about? It's about mitigation of risk. It's about quantification and, frankly, profitization of risk. So um, you just sort of have to decide for yourself. The industry will decide for itself, and the individual has to decide for him or herself. What is the range of risk that I am willing to live within and pay for? Because for some people, trucking is too dangerous. They don't want to do that. They think it's too dangerous and they're not going to do it.
Right.
Okay. And, but nobody is going to force the trucker, the truckers to be so safe as to not to get their jobs done, or so risk free as to not get their jobs done. So it's all a range. And the rules, the guidelines, I don't know exactly what they are, but the boxes that get checked off. It is just a start, but it can be the end. You have to assume, I think, it's the end because that's all you're required to do. Required, I mean, unless you're being reckless, unless you're fully aware that such and such is going to happen and you let it happen anyway. But um, there's all sorts of things we live with in life. Fire codes, for Christ's sake. All sorts of stuff you can do to make your office risk to mitigate risk for your employees at your office beyond the fire code. But if you don't do those, you ain't getting sued because you weren't outside the fire code. That's what the fire code's there for. Is to make sure that everyone does what people think is the minimum to do.
With your permission, because I want to respect your time, I want to go to topic number two, which I find fascinating. So you were primarily a baseball writer, and then you found this story about the NFL.
Hmm.
And then you took a seemingly totally left turn. And next thing I knew, you were publishing ADHD Nation, which is
Yeah.
about and I may mischaracterize this, but the overprescription of different drugs.
Of Adderall. Well, how's this? Let me come at it from a certain direction because it is more relevant. That the title of the book was ADHD Nation. Okay, but I'm going to explain that really the genesis of it. And it's far more immediately applicable to our conversation than it might otherwise be. When I was finishing up the football stuff in 2011, I heard about kids in my high school, my old high school, snorting Adderall before the SATs and taking Adderall regularly, not prescribed for ADHD, but just getting it and taking it to study, to stay up all night and study, to be more alert during exams, and all sorts of this kind of thing. I mean, none of this is surprising to truckers, for crying out loud. I mean, it's been used by truckers since the Second World War. All right. Not all truckers. I'm not throwing anyone under any buses or trucks or anything remotely like that. However, we all know that truckers use it some truckers, in order to get through extraordinarily long shifts that they would otherwise fall asleep during. Anyway, so when I heard about kids doing this in order to get better grades, in order to placate their parents' expectations of getting into Harvard and all that garbage, I was like, holy crap, what are we doing? What kind of pressure are we putting on these kids? And so I looked into it. The primary, or the virtually only source of these drugs, medications, whatever, they came from kids who had been diagnosed with ADHD. And, whether it was Adderall or Ritalin or Vyvanse or Concerta, these drugs. And those kids some of them would sell them to their friends so that they could use them for the SATs and exams. And this is not new. Students have been doing this since the 50s. There are articles in Time magazine about college kids I mean, this is not new. Air Force, or maybe it was Navy at the time, pilots in the Second World War, for long flights, for long missions, would take amphetamine. It was called Benzedrine at the time, but in any case, so what the project ended up being is like, why in the world are all these kids without ADHD getting diagnosed with ADHD and getting these drugs? How can you fake your way into a diagnosis? Well, it's because the medical establishment was not doing a very good job of figuring out what kids who really did have ADHD and should have the medications, and God bless them, and how many were fooling the system, and how much the system was allowing them to fool it because they wanted to make money, and et cetera, et cetera. It's a long story. But
It's a great book.
the project started out as it was a story about pressure, about kids being under a lot of pressure to perform. And and what they would do in order to make their superiors, their parents, happy, which is exactly what a lot of people do in their jobs. A lot of tech people take Adderall. Okay. A lot of, and for performance enhancement, not for a medical reason. A lot of pilots. Well, the pilots don't, because now they're going to, you're not, what's interesting is that you're not allowed to take Adderall, even medically, if you're a pilot. It's a separate conversation. But, truckers or, whoever it may be, gamers, it's now considered a performance enhancing drug. But the thing is that the people I just mentioned are adults. They're not children. And so, but that's what I ended up doing 10 or 15 really huge stories for the Times about sort of the ADHD industrial complex and how it was feeding this desire for enhanced performance in the United States and other countries as well, but particularly the United States. And but it started out as kids using it to do what was expected of them, and that's exactly what some truckers do too. Same thing.
But forgive my ignorance. It's speed, basically, right?
Yeah, it's amphetamine.
It's amphetamine.
Yeah, Yeah, but speed isn't inherently a bad thing. It's amphetamine. It is
So
used medically.
if I was a trucking company owner and I found out one of my drivers was popping Adderall to
Hmm.
stay alert on the road, am I benefiting and they're taking all the personal human risk? Or do
Yep.
I not want them on Adderall because it's actually unsafe at the end of the day?
You don't want to know they're on Adderall. You want them on Adderall. You just don't want to know, and you don't want anyone else to know you know. Yeah, I mean, now it's incredibly addictive. Okay, I mean, I'm not trying to be too glib. All right, depending on what kind of a boss you are, you might be like, hey, screw it. I want my guys to be, and women, as alert as possible. And great if they pop, 20 milligrams of Adderall in order to get through their shift. It's fine with me. You know, um, the problem is it's sort of mistaken for 5 hour energy. It ain't 5 hour energy. It ain't coffee. It ain't Red Bull. It ain't Monster. It's far more cocaine than it is those other things. But it's become so normalized. You see T-shirts, brought to you by Adderall, and it's sort of a joke. But I do want to warn truckers that, yes, it does for most people really make you more alert and more awake for 3, 4 hours, whatever it may be. Yes, it does. The problem is it's incredibly addictive. And next thing you know, you can't perform without it. And there are times when people will have reactions to it, side effects that they don't realize. You can have, psychotic breaks. It's rare. Yes, it's rare, but it happens. Or you can feel like there are bugs crawling underneath your skin, sleeplessness, temperature regulation. You can completely lose your appetite because, hey, amphetamine is used as an appetite suppressant, diet pills. So what the problem is that it's not dangerous enough for people to really take it as seriously as they should. There's this sort of sweet spot where everyone just sort of winks. But it's just, if you're going to do it, first of all, if you have one pill in your possession that wasn't prescribed to you, it's a felony. If you give one of your prescribed pills to somebody else, you are officially a drug dealer and you have committed a felony. It is really, really serious. They're not tic tacs. So I'm not here to preach and say, don't ever do it. And, oh my God, it's the devil's work. And no, it's just something that if you're going to do that, if you're going to take Adderall, that is or is not prescribed to you, just do it. It's just be very, very careful, please.
Thank you for explaining all that. Less Heavy book, an absolutely charming book that you wrote. I fell in love with it the first time I cracked the pages on it. You wrote a book called The Numbers Game, which
Hmm.
is a history of statistics in baseball.
Yes.
And this one's going to be a reach for me to connect to trucking, but I am going to try.
Well, I don't know if you know, it's extraordinarily popular among truckers. And if you are a trucker, if you go on Amazon, you can buy a copy. Truckers are more than welcome to purchase a copy. So it is really applicable to truckers.
The book chronicles how from the dawn of baseball, they started keeping score and they started tracking stats.
Hmm.
And it evolves all the way through, in my youth, the Stratomatic game, right?
Yeah.
And then the Bill James and the birth of fantasy leagues. And it covers all the way through the Moneyball era, because I know that you're an Oakland A's fanatic, and what Billy Beane did with the lowest payroll in baseball was chronicled in a book by Michael Lewis and then a movie.
Yep.
But what I find fascinating, and you know me, I'm a data nerd too, and
Hmm.
I've written software to help owners of these independent contractors analyze their business operationally and financially. And there's lots of things I'd love to do with more resources to make it easier and follow the red bouncing ball. But what I'm seeing in our space is the data you could collect on a trucking operation 40, 50 years ago was very light. I know how many gallons I bought. I know how many miles I ran, how many hours the engine was going. That's about it. Now, with all kinds of technology, there's an infinite amount of data out there. So much so that a lot of owners are starting to feel deluged. But you could say the same looking at the Bill James book. I mean, where do you even begin with the amount of statistics on every given player, right?
Hmm.
And there's got to be parallels there because
Oh, sure.
it's not just that they have reams of data, but they're getting better and better and better at figuring out baseball and picking players and grooming players. And is it about choosing the right data,
Well,
figuring out?
that's you buried the lead in some ways. First of all, every industry, baseball, trucking, and otherwise, has always relied on data, has always used, and by data, I think we'll just mean numbers for now. Uh, always relied on data or numerical metrics to try to evaluate what is going on and then how to make things better. Try to understand what is good, what serves the purpose of all of this, and then how can we, do better at it. And so when you talk about, gallons and miles and some of the, in my word, crude metrics that might have been used 50 years ago, that's not dissimilar from, baseball saying home runs, batting average and RBIs. They all tell you something. You know that more is better, basically, and then there is an optimization, and of course, trucking, it's not necessarily more gallons and more miles and whatever, but it's nonetheless I mean, batting average is a ratio, right? Okay, it's hits per opportunity. Well, gas mileage is miles divided by gallons. Crude doesn't tell you everything by any means, but it tells you something. And so baseball has been looking at has been trying to answer the question, what makes a good player? What makes a good team? And there's a lot of numbers to be looked at, in the first box score in 1858 or something like that. It was at bats and out. There was hits and outs. Those were the first two statistics, which, by the way, presaged Moneyball by, about 130 years. But uh, every industry has looked at numbers and investigated what new numbers might give us a better, more refined look at what it is we think is good and what we want to do in response to that. And there's been an evolution for 100, years, whatever. And so it's not new by any means. None of this stuff is new. None of this stuff in baseball is new at all. They were arguing about on base percentage in the 1860s during the Civil War. Everyone's like, oh, Billy Beane. No, that's not new. And
We
in the
love
same,
Billy Bean. Let's not slight Billy Bean.
I like Billy Beane. I like Billy Beane just fine, but he didn't invent this stuff, nor does he run around saying he did. Michael Lewis in some ways did, and I'm not, Michael's a friend. I'm not, but people got the impression from the book that Billy, invented this stuff. He didn't at all.
No,
And
but he was willing to bet big on looking at that and weighing it heavily compared to a lot of the traditional folks. No,
well, I think perhaps, yes, he was on one end of the bell curve. He was on, but there were a lot of other people on that end of the bell curve. It was just that had the most, he had the best story and the most visible success at
sure.
it. Okay. He was the inflection point. Um, and it wasn't just because of Michael Lewis, as important as Michael was, and as well as he captured that moment. Everybody knew in baseball what was going on there. I mean, Moneyball was no surprise to anybody. Um, and not Moneyball, the A's and how they used arbitrage techniques and undervaluing of on base percentage and devaluing of speed and defense because it was, you know, it was too expensive or whatever. Um, it's just that was the moment when it became most visible, when the curtain was open to the world. But anyone in baseball knew that that wasn't new.
Because look, I did a stint on Wall Street. In Wall Street, you want to talk about a place awash with data, right? You
Mhm.
get a Bloomberg terminal, you have more information at your fingertips than mankind had for five millennia, whatever, right? And on Wall Street, everybody plays their cards extremely close to the vest because if you have an edge, you don't want the other person to have the same edge and know what you're doing.
Mhm.
Baseball's very visible. The end of the movie basically ends with the fact that the Red Sox went and kind of looked at what he did and said, "Well, there's a lot to learn here. Let's do it." And next thing you know, the Red Sox
Yeah,
have a World Series, right?
not true.
Okay, good. I'm glad I got that right.
No, no, no. That may be what the movie said
Oh,
and
right.
did.
Okay.
What? No, no, no. But I mean, it wasn't true. The Red Sox were doing it already, for crying out loud. I mean,
But
they
but
had
but
been for years.
but the parallel that I see is in trucking. There's all kinds of things happening in technology right now, and some of them are not so valuable. Some of them are valuable. But I think if you look at the history of stats in baseball, it's always been a slow evolution. But once people bought into something because it really has value, the numbers have value. It's like everybody starts saying that that's the new baseline. We're going to start looking at these things. And it slowly evolves and goes further and further, right? And I see in trucking parallels because there are certain data elements that you couldn't collect 20 years ago, but the technology allows you to collect now. Some of them
Mhm.
are useless, some of them are very valuable, and there are people who are slow to adopt these things. And
Yes.
I think it's change or get left behind because if it's a good piece of data and it's really valuable for running your business and you don't start adopting it, you're going to run into problems because the bar gets raised and you're not keeping up.
Well, I think that one of the things that makes baseball and sports different than trucking in the context that we're speaking about it now is that in baseball, there's a lot of randomness. Okay. Whether you hit the ball at a 22-degree angle in such a way that it doesn't go into the shortstop's glove and it happens to go over it, is, you know, is only recently become measurable. And whether teams win or lose, there's a lot of randomness involved, particularly when you get to the postseason, which is what we saw with the Oakland A's of the early 2000s. Is that you can win 104 games during the year, but if you have a 5 game series, or I think it's a 7 game series, the chance if one team has a 60% uh, chance of winning a game, the chances that they win the series are very high. But the chances still of the worst team winning is still like 30%. 1/3 of the time, the wrong quote unquote team is going to win, which of course drives bettors nuts. Uh, but I think with trucking, it's certainly more predictable. I would think.
You'd be
Oh,
surprised how much randomness there is in trucking.
well, tell me what kind of randomness is there in
Well,
trucking?
like we talked about safety, which we're not allowed to use that word anymore, risk management, right?
Damn right.
Your guys could be doing everything right with a great piece of equipment. Some idiot on the road slams into them,
There you go. Very nice. Yep.
right?
Yep. 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 Perfect.
Um,
Yeah. And so is that a a demerit? Is that somehow piece of evidence against the strategy? Of course not. you can't control for everything. And so it's only through enough trials. I mean, it's randomness, it's product testing, it's basic statistics, which is I taught for a year here in New York City. And
One of your favorite
yeah,
experiences.
yeah, absolutely. No, it was in some way. And
That was a big lie.
yes, I know. No, 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 no. If anyone from my old school is listening, I loved it. I loved many parts of it. So anyway,
You did.
um,
I'll give you that, but
I
you also
did.
be
I
careful.
did. Because I know that, a lot of people in higher education here, in higher private education in New York, does view the trucking programming that you're
Hey, don't
providing here,
start my
John.
audience. Don't go there.
No, no, no. I would hope they are watchers of it.
They could learn a few
But
things.
I'm sure they could. Just not from me. And uh, but that's the thing is there's a degree of common sense here. You can't bow at the altar of of a metric or even a suite of metrics, um, and you just do your best. You mitigate risk, but you can't make it zero. And you just try to do your best and maximize your ability to accomplish whatever it is you want to accomplish. But guess what? Sometimes it ain't going to happen. And that that has to be factored into your model. Of course it does. 1 out of 50 times the trucker's not going to show up.
That's
you
a good
know?
week.
Yeah. I mean, it's just that's the way it is. And so I think that there has to be. I've always tried to teach, whether it's in educational settings or when I'm interviewed, or you have to have a great deal of, or it would be foolish to not have a great deal of humility when dealing with numbers. The most important thing to know about numbers is not what they say, it's what they don't say. And you need to realize that they are not the be all and end all by any means. There's human emotion, there's human error, and you do your best.
Alan, that's a great note to end on. And I also know that you probably have a beautiful wife waiting for you for dinner because you've been kind enough to do this late in the day. Um,
Well,
you,
anything for my friend John. Anyone who's listening, all right, now I'm going to do this. I'm going to
both of
take the
them?
mic here. Yes, exactly. No, but John, you have been somebody who, I've known you for almost 30 years now, and you have always taken such a wonderful, thoughtful approach to not just talking about something, but braiding different subjects together. Your varied background, in my case, my varied background, and guess what? Truckers have varied backgrounds too, and they have interests. They have a lot of interests, and they have a lot of experiences, and your ability, not only ability, but enthusiasm for braiding all those things together, I think is a wonderful service to your audience that hopefully has gotten something out of this conversation too.
Well, Alan, more gracious than true, but I'll take it. Thank you. And
All right.
thank you again for your time and generosity and sharing your thoughts on this and for willing to try to stretch and understand a little bit about our world and how to help us.
Absolutely. It's my absolute pleasure. And anyone wants to reach out, feel free.
All right. Thank you, Alan. Until
You
next
got
time.
it. Take care. Take care, John.